Just because an exercise exists doesn't mean it's good for your joints. You may think an exercise is great for your muscles, and it can still load your joints and spine the wrong way. If your joints ache and you think your exercise contributes to it, you may be right. Hi, I'm Bill DeSimone, and this is my commentary on excerpts from Joint Friendly Fitness. Feel free to fast forward to a slide you're interested in, as neither the book or this video is designed to be read straight through like a novel. Now about the cover. The point was to show different types of exercise covered in the book, not necessarily that I'm a fan of each. The analysis of the exercise and then what to do about it is the point of the book. Here's the table of contents. This, like most, if not all of the visual flourishes, comes from Autumn Bean, an art educator, designer, sister of Ariel, one of my interns. I had given them a straight list of contents, and they sent back this 2-page spread with graphic element across the bottom of the page, which makes it easier to read and more interesting to look at. Now the actual print content is slightly different, as this design violates a border or something. The order of the contents is very deliberate. I found that when I gave talks, if I started with the biomechanics and then tried to relate to exercises, I had already lost the audience, but if I started with exercises, then explained the biomechanics, I got a much better response. Now here I'm just having some fun with PowerPoint. These are the section headings of the first chapter, with what I hope is the main point elaborated on in the actual text. This chapter is all text. Now the second chapter is part text and part diagram. Exercises missing piece discusses the lack of any kind of critical review of the exercises themselves beyond the preference of the writer or the poster or speaker. Unseen aspects refers to the mechanical moment arm created by the weight and the body, the muscle torque profile through a joint's motion, and the vulnerable joint positions that you may move through during a rep. Caveat exerciser simply means that accidents, prior conditions, and mistakes happen, so there's no perfectly safe exercise, but just because you can't control all of the risks doesn't mean you shouldn't control the knowable ones. And the questions on this slide on the right are specifically how I came up with the star ratings to assign each exercise. Here's the first page of the star ratings. The stars strictly refer to how manageable the exercise is to do safely for the joints. Now I used a 5-star rating because it's so common nowadays, and it allows for some discretion on the part of the reader. Rather than saying, never do this exercise, if you like an exercise and you see it has 1 or 2 stars, my hope is that you see what the concerns are, and then you can decide if it's worth doing for you. The alternative is to pretend that there are no concerns and act surprised when the obvious accident happens. More fun with PowerPoint. This is really the guts of the book, a page or 2 of text, and then over 70 exercises demonstrated. I used 2-page spreads for each exercise so that the pictures are big enough to show subtle differences in posture and limb position that make the difference between the productive, safe range of an exercise and the extreme ranges that just stress the joints with no extra benefit to the muscles. These slides are not in the same order as the book, but I wanted to make some general comments before getting into the details. The grayscale, or black and white, is deliberate. Ellington Darden's books, which I've been following since the 70s, all were in black and white, and so were the muscle magazines of the time, so that look is nostalgic, and if you share that nostalgia age-wise, you're a candidate for this material. More to the point of communication, I wanted to emphasize the postures and limb positions, and I didn't want color to distract from that. Notice the X positions and the check positions, X meaning avoid and check meaning include. If the pictures are sufficient, you would stop there. If you need more explanation, the bullet points under each picture are tips and notes about the position, and the paragraph at the bottom elaborates in, I hope, full sentences. This is about the exercises, not the anatomy and biomechanics, which is discussed at length in the next chapter. Notice the calves. Also, notice the ruptured right triceps. This spread shows a couple of important concepts that are going to repeat. Loading the spine in flexion on the far left and sway back on the far right. A couple of clearly contraindicated postures for spine health. Said contraindications being regularly ignored in the exercise world. We'll get into the specifics of spine health later in this video, but for now, just go with it. This is Cindy, a friend of my wife and mine, who I helped get started in personal training and still sees clients in my studio, also in moment arm exercise. Again, loading the spine in flexion on the far left and sway back on the far right. Notice the curve in Cindy's lumbar spine in the second from left picture. If you're going to deadlift, only go as low as you can to protect that curve, otherwise you're flirting with a back injury. And this might mean using blocks or a partner to tell you where the bottom is. Now this is obviously not a competitive style deadlift. If that's your choice of sport, like any sport, you accept the risk and deal with the consequences. My preferred leg press, the Nautilus Nitro, because it builds the curves of the spine into the curves in the seat back. Notice in the first picture with the seat too close, the spine is again loaded in flexion as well as the hips are being crowbarred. In the checked pictures, the subject is lifted on a couple of pads to align her spine curves with the curves in the seat back, and the seat is reclined to approximate the posture of a freehand squat. Nautilus built a great feature but then forgot to accommodate it, so I use either pads or I simply leave a gap between the bottom and the seat. This, by the way, is my daughter Amanda. At one time, this station was in every gym everywhere, the Nautilus Pullover. A vast improvement over a free weight pullover, but still problematic if you're not aware of shoulder biomechanics. This station was touted as having 270 degrees of motion around the shoulder. Unfortunately, it's clear in the biomechanics textbooks that the shoulder itself only has about 120 degrees of motion. And after that, the user has to arch and flex the spine, release the scapula for the humerus to migrate upwards into impingement, and work against the ligaments binding in the shoulder. So you're not building flexibility into the shoulder, you're creating laxity. Fortunately, it's a simple enough fix to limit the range. I heard from a lot of trainers that, based on their own experience and their clients' complaints, they were doing this intuitively. But I also keep hearing of newer trainers claiming full range for flexibility. By the way, this is one of my earlier interns, Sabrina, who went to work with Adam in New York City, which is where her pictures were taken. Thank you, Sabrina and Adam. The decline press. What a bad idea, especially with a barbell. Between the blood rushing to your head, the shoulder impingement, and the possibility of chopping your head off with a missed lift, if you must do this, use either dumbbells or a station where you sit upright and the motion mimics the decline press. The whole idea of isolating the bottom of the pectorals is dubious, by the way, as it misinterprets pennation, the angle of muscle fibers. Pennation has less to do with how your limbs move and more to do with how the body organizes fibers to get more fibers in the muscles used for force. This, by the way, is my son Matt, who said, "Hey Dad, this hurts," and I said, "I know, that's why you're doing it, not me." I elaborated on the incline curl in the moment arm exercise for the biceps video elsewhere on this channel. Just about the perfect biceps exercise between the optimal positions. Let me point out that it's the act of supinating against resistance that engages the biceps, not just positioning in supination. With dumbbells, especially if your grip is slightly off center, the weight resists supination at about the 90-degree mark. If you notice, many equipment manufacturers have switched from the preacher bench curl design to mimicking the incline curl. By the way, this is Silas, Cindy's husband, pressed into service at the last minute. Thank you, bud. A classic triceps exercise, the imaginatively named Pressdown. For all the different triceps exercises out in the exercise world, which claim to emphasize different parts of the triceps, the real difference is in the nature of the joint strain each variation flirts with. With either an easy curl handle or separate handles, the press down is the easiest to manage and most effective, as it also matches the pattern for elbow extension muscle torque almost exactly. This, by the way, is my wife of almost 40 years, Linda. Spine extension over a Bosu. As you'll see later in this video, this aligns well with the effective range for the muscles of the spine while protecting the vertebrae, ligaments, discs, and other connective tissues. This chapter comes after the visual guide, where I try to explain the biomechanics specifically as they relate to exercises. This is sort of my flow chart. Thanks again to Autumn for cleaning up my scribbles. If you track each vertical down, you see how I sorted the biomechanics material, most of which is not written with exercise in mind. Someone studying biomechanics cold, however, wouldn't necessarily end up here because I started with over 20 years of exercise experience and then read up on the biomechanics with that in mind. PowerPoint Designer at its finest. On the left are the headings for the muscle section. These are condensed from moment arm exercise and congruent exercise. In the middle are the headings for the spine, which we're about to get into. Since each set of joints has its own unique concerns, after basic anatomy and function, each has its own set of headings. This is not a template. So periodically, doubt gets cast on my knowledge of the spine and exercise. I beg to differ. So among other parts of the bibliography, here's where my knowledge of the spine comes from. On the left, the basic anatomy from Brunstrom's Clinical Kinesiology. In the middle, Brooks in Effective Strength Training, which has his own bibliography, explaining what happens at the extremes of flexion and extension. And on the right, an ACE publication, Essentials of Exercise Science for Fitness Professionals, demonstrates the active, safe ranges for the spine. On the left, from the Strength and Conditioning Journal, a paper which also demonstrates good and bad exercise postures for the spine. In the middle, an example of the Industrial Spine Safety Guidelines, which I use for my recommendations. And on the right, the Journal of the Spine Research Foundation, a paper explaining how force works through the spine. And here are the visuals of the postures of the spine. Normal spine curves on the left, all the aberrations on the right, which are not unique to any one certifying group, nor is the recommendation that the safest way to load the spine is through its natural curves. There's nothing wrong in my understanding of the spine and exercise. I'm just not a fan of exercises that make adhering to spine safety guidelines unlikely, whether it's kettlebell swings or lumbar extension stations. The ones who should explain themselves are the kettlebell coaches, the barbell coaches, and the machine technicians that call themselves trainers, who are either dismissive or not aware of the spine safety guidelines. Back to the book. I include a routines chapter for anyone rethinking their workout. And as I point out in the first column, if you already have a routine, then just adjusting your ranges should make your workout easier on your joints. If you're overhauling everything, or for somebody starting, I put some ideas on a standard routine, which I admit is very influenced by Ellington Darden. Then I read about 10 and 60, 10 break 5, halfway holds, none of which is entirely original, except maybe the idea of setting a timer for 30-second repeats and aiming for 5 reps every 30 seconds instead of timing each repetition, which I personally find nerve-wracking. Then I write about breaking a plateau and specialized routines for those so motivated. I finish this section with how to include steady state and interval cardio and sample weekly schedules that incorporate other physical activities. And here's the full bibliography. Keep in mind this isn't a dissertation that I have to defend, but I did want to make clear that this isn't just my favorite exercises or bro science. There was a process behind it. And the process wasn't to find the exercise instruction in these references and reword them. I had years of exercise, reading the muscle magazines, personal training clients, NSCA certifications, college coursework, before rupturing my own biceps and triceps, which is what led to the research. Many of these books I had open in front of me as I was A, learning the concepts, and B, figuring out how to communicate them appropriately. Here are a few examples of the references. Brunstrom's Clinical Kinesiology. This is actually a later version than the one I started with. If you're not studying for current school, you might find earlier versions express things clearer. On the right is a diagram of the carrying angle of the elbow, which factors into many biceps and elbow flexion exercises. In the middle is a length tension diagram of muscle, which suggests why emphasizing the stretch position of exercises is not a great idea. In biomechanics, the phrase stretch position implies stretch from fully shortened, not stretch to the breaking point, which is how a lot of stretch position exercises interpret it. Basic Biomechanics of the Musculoskeletal System. This book was one of Tom Purvis's recommended readings for his course, which I never took. I just picked up his references. And later, one of the interns, Emily, brought me her current textbooks, and this was one of them. Emily, I might add, worked for Roger Schwab for a year and then got a master's in education. This excerpt on the right is scapulohumeral rhythm, the process of raising your arm above shoulder height. In the middle, the diagram shows disc pressure at several angles conditions, showing at 110 degrees with lumbar support being the easiest on the discs. And this is why I recommend using steep inclines for curls, presses, etc. For the exercise seat setting. The Sports Injuries Guidebook, excellent for understanding the internal mechanisms for injury. I used the middle material for my mini talk at this year's rec on exercise design and shoulder health, especially about the shoulder migrating upward leading to impingement. The right, about the posterior cruciate ligament, explains partially why loading your knee into the most extreme flexion, such as a rock bottom squat, an extreme range leg extension station, walking lunges with the knee far ahead of the foot, loading the knees far over the toes in general, is not as great an idea for knee health as you may have heard. Here are a sample of papers documenting exercise-induced injuries. The Journal of Orthopedics, the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, the British Journal of Sports Medicine. Emily found over 600,000 hits on exercise injury in the academic databases at Rutgers. And even after weeding out sports, gender differences, age-related, etc., we still had too many to pick from. These are a few that confirm my concerns. For every objection I've heard that I've done this for years and I've never had a problem, well, the research into the academic databases suggests otherwise. One of my favorite papers, especially for a high-intensity training audience. The CAM and the strength curve has been part of Nautilus and high-intensity discussion since the beginning. I have never seen a definitive paper or explanation of how the cam shapes were determined, which doesn't mean they don't exist, but that I've somehow never come across them. I've read what Jones and Hutchins had to write about it and found inconsistencies and never any references. On the other hand, I found muscle torque curves and consistent explanations in Brunstrom's and other biomechanics textbooks. So I wrote in Moment Arm and Congruent Exercise and in Joint Friendly Fitness that the muscle torque curve is predictable and not malleable. It doesn't change significantly based on the resistance. And that the feel of a good match between muscle torque and resistance torque is one of effort at each point of the rep without any sticking points or lockouts. Which, long story short, means aligning the sticking point, the maximum resistance moment arm, with the joint angle for peak muscle torque. This paper explains statistically and graphically which are the strongest joint angles for several joint movements corresponding to the exercises on the right. And when you look at these graphs, remember that a 0-degree angle, the far left of the graphic, is the anatomic neutral position, not necessarily the start or finish of an exercise. And the conclusion of Joint Friendly Fitness, where I wrap up 250 plus pages and a handful of bullet points with a great graphic again from Autumn. The point of good form in exercise to ensure that your muscles work appropriately and you protect your supporting muscles, joints, and connective tissues. It's a combination of the optimal range, not loading the extreme range, and managing your posture. Everything else about your program can vary as long as they don't interfere with those three pillars. Don't ignore your own observations. Remember, caveat exerciser. And you want to be invigorated by your workout, not obliterated. Remember that exercise can be effective without being excessive. It should challenge your fitness, not your safety, and work out smarter than harder. And in the nice graphic to the right, don't let the machine or the weight push you into a stretch. Maintain your lumbar curve and keep your hands in your peripheral vision. And these don't have to be perfect, but if you aim for them, you'll probably stay within your margin of error. And if you haven't already, links. The left is the entry for the print version, which is the entire 70 plus exercises and all the biomechanics chapters. On the right, this Kindle covers home small gym exercises only, a couple of biomechanics chapters, and a foreword by Ellington Darden. If you follow me at the author link, you'll get notified of future publications such as Kindle versions of Joint Friendly Fitness Back, Chest, and Shoulders with a foreword by Simon Shawcross, Joint Friendly Fitness Arms with a foreword by John Little, Joint Friendly Fitness Trunk, Hips, and Thighs with a foreword by Amy Ashmore, PhD, and a print reissue of Moment Arm Exercise. Thank you for watching. Thanks for your interest. Happy and healthy training.